Welcome back to another video supplement on the book Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus. In this video, we'll talk about chapters 8, 9, and 10. Chapter 8 opens in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, we've all read about this when we talk about the Passion Week or Jesus' last week on earth, but I thought I might show you what the real garden looks like today. This is a picture of the Garden of Gethsemane, and in Jesus' day, it would have actually been an olive grove with an olive press. In Hebrew, Gethsemane is Gechmanea, olive press, and this is what it might have looked like. And in this section, the authors take on Leviticus 23, God's feasts. And so they look at the calendar of Jewish feasts and break it down feast by feast so that we can see what the purpose of each one is, how it helps the Jewish people recall how God has rescued them in the past. So for example, with Passover, Passover remembers God delivering his people out of Egypt and how he saved them during the 10th plague by putting the blood over their doorposts and when they had to eat their Passover lamb. And if you're curious about what dining was like in Jesus' day, our friends at Appian Media have a great video showing what an actual Passover ceremony may have looked like during Jesus' time, reclining at the table and passing the food. It's very interesting. I hope you'll go take a look. The next section, the Bread of Passover, explains what type of bread they would have used during this particular festival. And we've all seen Da Vinci's painting, but I love how the authors point out there's something not quite right here if you take the Old Testament into account. If you remember when the Israelites were leaving Egypt in a hurry, they didn't have time for their bread to rise. Very quickly in succession, the next feast on God's calendar is a day later, the Feast of Firstfruits. Now this is typically when the ancient Israelites would have brought in the first of the barley harvest, and we see this in the book of Ruth. And to end this chapter, the authors bring it all together in the section about remembering our redemption. And this is really important because each of God's feasts have a way to help you remember how God has redeemed his people. And then, of course, Jesus comes, the Messiah, and takes it one step further by himself fulfilling each of these feasts, and how his death, burial, and resurrection have brought us, as Christians, redemption today. The authors continue this discovery of Jewish feasts into chapter 9. And next on the kingdom calendar comes a very interesting Jewish feast called Shavuot. In Hebrew, Shavuot means weeks, and it recalls the weeks after the Israelites left Egypt and how it took them about 7 weeks to get to Mount Sinai, where God gave his law to Moses. This festival was still being celebrated at the time of Jesus and shortly afterwards because we read about it in Acts chapter 2. In Greek, it's called Pentecost because Penta means 50. So about 50 days. So 7 weeks, about 50 days. And it ends up on this festival. Now we know Pentecost is the day that the Christian church was established. This is the church's birthday. And it all started here in Jerusalem with Jewish people coming from all over the known world at the time into Jerusalem to celebrate Shavuot. But when they get there, and when they get to the temple, they hear Peter delivering his first gospel sermon. Now, there is discussion in the book about where this actually took place. Was it in an upper room where this preaching happened and where all of these people were converted and baptized? Where did that actually happen? So take a look at pages 123 and 124 for a really unique insight about where this actually would have taken place. In the next section, the Fall Holy Days, the authors describe the final 3 remaining feasts on God's kingdom calendar: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. These 3 happen about 6 months after Passover. Rosh Hashanah is also called the Feast of Trumpets, and we can see that with this shofar. And I'd love for you to hear what that sounds like. I've linked to a great video that demonstrates a shofar and the different trumpet blasts that they would play for this holiday. This feast would be followed by what's called Yom Kippur, also called the Day of Atonement. And this would be a very solemn day filled with fasting, and the only time once a year when the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies to offer the sacrifice to atone for the people's sins. And the final feast on this kingdom calendar from Leviticus 23 is Sukkot, also called the Feast of Tabernacles. This feast recalls when the Israelites wandered for 40 years through the wilderness, living in tents or booths, or in Hebrew, a sukkah. And so Sukkot is celebrated even today for 7 days, where the Jewish people will build sukkahs or booths in their gardens or yards, and they will attempt to live out there, even with holes intentionally in the roof, for 7 days, remembering God's providential care in the wilderness. Now, you might remember the strange incidents during the Transfiguration story of when Peter looked up and saw the three of them there and said, "Lord, can I build you a booth?" Well, he really meant this, a sukkah, because this festival was also celebrated anytime they thought the Messiah had come. And Peter was convinced the Messiah had come through Jesus, and he was ready to go build him a sukkah. And now for chapter 10, At Table with the Rabbi. I love the author's section on ancient hospitality. In fact, one of my favorite stories to teach children is about the hospitality of Abraham and Sarah when 3 unexpected visitors came to their Bedouin tent. And this may be what Abraham might have looked like in front of his tent. And we know that he said, "Quick, Sarah, get 3 seahs of flour, about 75 pounds of flour, and slaughter the animals." And they were going to make a feast for 3 people they didn't know. And I love the personal story the authors shared about their time with the Bedouins. But this is what a Bedouin meal looks like. I hope that this video supplement has been helpful to you to imagine and picture the different Jewish feasts, the celebrations, the food, the hospitality, and what dining with Jesus might have looked like. Join me in the next video where we'll cover chapters 11 through 14 and finish off the book.